I've had my workout for the day. I feel like I've had my sermon for the day. I feel like I've had a lot of things for the day, but we'll leave it at that. So, you know what I thought I'd talk about, since the talk kind of has to be a little bit condensed today, is how we experience God. There was a book written about 15 years ago called What's Your Spiritual Type? And the book was actually based on an Episcopal priest who did some research, historical research in the 50s. And the way that he did that research is he looked back at the lives of the saints and sages, explored their writings, their biographies, and the thing that he came up with as he studied was that not everybody experiences God in the same way. Now, I'm not talking about the stories we tell about God. I'm talking about how we experience the divine. And then he proceeded to write about it. So before I talk about his findings, I want to do a little story that I think many of y'all have seen me do before, but it really illustrates the point well.
Mommy.
So, let's say 6,000 years ago, Paul was working in the fields, right? And so he's working away, he takes a rest, and he stands on one leg, and he's drinking out of his animal skin or his wine skin or whatever it is he drinks out of, and he has, boom, this numinous experience that overtakes him. And he's floored by it. He's blown to smithereens. And so this thing that happened to Paul was the world's first spiritual experience. Well, he's doing the fields with Jamal, and so he goes over to Jamal and he says, hey, if you'll go over there and you'll stand in that spot right there and you'll lift one leg, the most amazing thing will happen to you. So Jamal comes over and he does this exact same thing. Boom! He's like, this thing opens up and there's just this amazing opening to him, and all of life makes sense, and he has an experience of the divine. So Paul and Jamal go get Brad, who's also been in the fields with him. And they're like, hey Brad, if you'll go over there and you'll stand in this exact spot, and you'll lift one leg and you'll stand there like this, the most amazing thing will happen. So Brad comes over and he stands in one spot. Now, you notice I'm using all men because men got to write this stuff. Right? So anyway, so Brad stands in that spot. He lifts one leg. What happens? But what does Brad do? He thinks there's something wrong with him, so he pretends. Oh yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, I love that. That was cool. Okay, so Brad goes away thinking there's something wrong with him, but he doesn't have this experience. He can tell a story about what he actually did, but he doesn't have nothing happens for him. And so these guys, they have a spiritual experience, and Brad has a story about somebody else's spiritual experience. And this is important because there's a lot of people in the world that have a story about somebody else's spiritual experience, but have never had one of their own. Now, we have ideas about what we need to be doing in order to have spiritual experience. Right? We need to be praying or meditating. What else? What else constitutes a spiritual experience?
Running down the street.
You're jumping ahead, Sally. So the world has stories about what it takes to have a spiritual experience, and they're pretty narrow, right? So they're prayer in some traditions, and meditation in some traditions, and silence and retreat, chanting. Exactly.
Dancing.
Yeah, dancing. So we're going to get to that. So this guy, Urban Holmes was his name, he actually looked at, well, what constitutes the experience of God? And he came up with basically 4 categories. And you know, this is one of the 3 talks that's worth doing every year, because all of us going through our day-to-day lives, without the practice that feeds us, something inside us can dry up. Right? And it's good to be able to say, yeah, that's me, and that's, I need to remember to do that for myself. So we're going to look in a very a shortened way at these 4 types, spiritual types. So I'm going to ask a little bit to bring up the first slide. Okay, so this first type of spirituality we're going to call a head spirituality. I'm going to tell you a story about it. My mother, I grew up Catholic. My mother was Catholic, and it blew me away that my mother could be Catholic, because, you know, Catholic doctrine is pretty interesting, restrictive, has a lot of very peculiar characteristics about it. And I'm having a conversation with my mom once I'm out of the house, because you were required to go to Mass until you left the house, and then you were on your own. Well, after talking to my mom, I realized that she didn't really believe in papal infallibility, and she thought it was fine to be gay or lesbian, and she thought it was ridiculous that women couldn't be priests, and I'm like, well, how can you be Catholic? Okay, so my mother would be an example of someone who did not have this type of spirituality. It didn't matter that there was congruence between the ideas and her tradition, because she had her own ideas. That's not where she experienced God. But if you look at me or Rodney, for example, you're going to see a lot of this type of spirituality. So we're going to leave this chart up once it has all 4 of the types, by the way. We'll leave it up, you know, for a little while so that if you want to write it down, you can. Okay. This type of spirituality, there has to be consistency that makes sense. So God must make sense. And we experience God, so for those of you with this type of spirituality, what I say has to make sense. I have to do a good job at my part of what we're creating here. Prayer for this type tends to be some structured words. So our way of praying, affirmative prayer that has kind of 5 generic steps, this works really well for somebody with a head type spirituality. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When Rodney or I are not exposed anymore, and many of you, to an expanding idea of the divine that makes sense and that we experience in our daily lives, something dries out. Something dries out inside of us. So we're on a constant quest for a bigger God that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is the contribution of this type of spirituality to the world. All the great writers in the traditions, they have a significant portion of head spirituality. What I want to say before we go on to the next type is that these types are not exclusive. Right? So it's not that you're one to the exclusion of every other, like some typologies are. You actually can have all 4 in measure, or two of them that are predominant. So yeah, that's important to say, because you may be able to identify yourself in more than one of these. So how many of you would consider that you have at least some part of a head spirituality? Okay, that makes sense. Let's go on to heart. All right. What do we see going on up here?
Art.
That was some art. That was some God, wasn't it? That was some I don't even have words for it. I can only do these gestures that are really big, right? Because it defies words. I mean, truly, did you not feel that?
Yeah.
So you can watch it, but the eyes only give you a portion of what's really happening, because what's happening is so embodied, it's so inside you. So when we have a person that has heart spirituality, these are the feelers. These are we feelers. We gotta feel it. But this was my mom. She felt a relationship with the Virgin Mary, and that constituted the whole of her Catholicism. The rest of it, she didn't care about. But she connected, my mother, who was a mother of 7, she connected on a very personal basis with this archetype of the Virgin Mary, which to her was not an archetype, it was an actual, it was a historical figure for her. All right. So, what do I want to say about this? The quintessential heart-centered service would be a progressive Black Baptist service. Big choir. A great deal of spontaneity, maybe to the degree that it's a 2-hour sermon. Y'all would shoot me if I did that. You'd be like, Catherine Cates is my timekeeper, and she can let me know. All right. So prayer is very spontaneous, although I have quite a bit of this heart-centered, so you can hear it in my praying. Right? You can hear it. You can hear it while he's praying, too. The gift of a heart-centered spirituality is that it is this full, embodied, emotional, energetic presence. I forgot to cover something that's really important. So I'm going to back up again. I want to take a look at what it looks like if the type that you predominantly are, the type that you greatly identify with, gets out of whack. See, these were originally presented on a wheel. So head and heart were opposite each other, and the next two are opposite each other. Because what can happen is if you overly practice one type, it becomes excessive. And I don't know about y'all, but sometimes for me I can identify my types by their excess. Right? So if your spirituality is all up in your head and it's bone dry, you need to practice the thing that's on the opposite side of the wheel. So in other words, if God's all in your head, you need to try some of that. Some of that. Y'all try some of that. Okay, now, if you're all caught up in feeling to the point where it's not serving you, you need to try some of that. Does that make sense? Yes. Right? Because the wheel is a representative of wholeness. And so anytime something gets out of whack, it tells us, hey, try this over here. Because if you try this, you'll be back within the wheel, and the experience that you have will reveal your wholeness. My child's spitting on the floor up here, Mom. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what kind of spirituality that is. But, all right, let me see the third type. All right. So the third type of spirituality is called mystic, for lack of a. Actually, the actual word that it is so theological we don't have to get out of a dictionary. So what we're going to say is that this is a mystic type of spirituality. What is real, how God is real to the mystic, is to go within. Right? So if you show up between 11 and 11:20 on Sundays because you don't want to miss Riley's meditation, and you don't miss your daily meditation, you have some degree of this. Right? And prayer for these people doesn't involve a lot of talking. Doesn't involve a lot of talking. So sometimes when we have somebody that has a very mystical nature, and we try to teach them affirmative prayer, it doesn't work for them. And you'll hear me oftentimes saying, you don't have to say a thing to have done an affirmative prayer. Because words might not be your thing. Silence might be your thing. What else do I want to say about this? So the downside, I'm going to jump down to the gift that the people with a mystic sense of spirituality bring is this rich inner life and the ability to listen for the voice of the divine. It's actually, I think I flipped. So the downside is, well, what's the downside? People who have a very involved inner life oftentimes become withdrawn, right? And you can go to a Benedictine monastery and you can see people that have this way of life that's working for them, and you can see people who have this primary experience of the divine that is not working for them, right? Because in a Benedictine monastery, you do a lot of quiet, but you also do a lot of service. And so and it no longer serves them. What else do I want to say about this? Yeah, I got some of it. Okay, so let me back up again. How many of you have some of this heart-centered spirituality? Show of hands. How many of you have mystic-type spirituality? Y'all are so balanced. All right, let's see the first one. Kingdom spirituality, again, it's the name, we've changed the name to protect the theology, really. I mean, it's a very long theological name. So, have you met a person, first of all, we may have some kingdom spirituality here, but it's probably not anybody's predominant type. And the reason that I say that is because if it was, you probably wouldn't be here. You don't have time to sit here. This is not how you bring about the kingdom of God. There are things to be done out there in the world, and by God, we don't have an hour to waste making ourselves feel better. There's work to be done. Right? So the reason it's called kingdom spirituality is because the focus, the experience of God is to bring the kingdom of God here, now, for everyone. So these are your social activists. I mean, you're very driven social activists. These are the people working at Meals on Wheels. These are the people whose predominant experience of God comes when they are in service to a grand vision. Right? Prayer, they don't waste a lot of words on prayer. I don't need to sit around and be quiet. I don't need to talk about God. I need to be working actively for the kingdom of God to manifest right here, right now for all people. Right? Now, the downside of this particular one is arrogance. It's moralism. There can be a lot of self-righteousness. And people looking down their nose at you because you're taking the time to sit in a Sunday service when you ought to be out there doing something that's making the world a better place. Right? That's only in its extreme. So the thing I want to point out again is if a person becomes withdrawn, they need to be in service for a little bit to bring them back into balance. If a person is high and mighty on their horse about what authentic spirituality looks like, then exploring their own inner life is what can bring them back into balance. Does that make sense? Okay. So why am I talking about it today? Just to go back and remind you, we have ideas about how we experience God, and we begin to A, dry out, or B, to think that we're missing something. And so it's so important to remember that nobody can tell you what your experience of God is like, or the divine is like, or wholeness is like. Those are things you actually have to explore for yourself, and although nobody can tell you specifically, there's a lot of really great roadmaps out there. And this is just one of them. Anything else I want to say about this? How am I doing on time, Catherine?
You're doing here at 12:20. Gotta wrap it up.
All right. Yeah. So there's only one other thing I want to say about this. No, there's two other things I want to say about this. Okay, so I was sitting in a counseling appointment about 6 months ago with somebody, and he called me and said, I need to make an appointment with you. And he came to my office, which is my house, and he said, I don't think I believe in God. This is crap. I don't believe any of this. This is not working for me. And through a series of sort of questions and explorations, what we came to is that, that this man's primary experience of the divine is beauty. That it is in the expression of art and music and dance and the elegance of a plastic bag blowing down the street in the wind. That this man feels God. And I don't know where that falls on there. But I tell you that because it's a reminder that if we don't know, then nobody can tell us. They can help us, they can ask questions of us that help us get clear. But it's an inside job. We actually have to pay attention for ourselves. The second thing to remember is that anything that we label, we can overdo. And so I offer things like this and things like it to you so that they can enhance the possibility of your own understanding. But we can't impose that understanding from the outside. Finally, I want to say, if this seems interesting to you and you're not quite sure or you want more information, I do actually have a quiz on my computer, and I will be happy to send that to you if you'll just let me know. Or I can print some and bring them for next week. And yeah, I think I feel complete, so let's pray. So somewhere I read that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But sometimes God's not the Word. Sometimes God's the sound. Sometimes God's the movement. Sometimes God's the hands and hearts that bring relief and kindness. Sometimes God is the still, small voice that never speaks. And so we really mean it when we say there's only one life, there's only one thing happening, and it's God. There's only one thing happening, and it's wholeness. And so the adventure of a lifetime then is to find out how we divide the indivisible so that we can more clearly feel and know and comprehend this one thing. So I'm reminded as well that there is one life. That life is God's life. That life is good. That life is my life. That life is the life of everyone here, without exception. That life is the life of everyone everywhere. All life without exception. I know that each one of us is uniquely expressing that life that is God or the divine or the allness, the wholeness. That we do it. It's the way that each of us shows up and grows up in time as spirit. So I affirm and declare that we begin this adventure of finding out how Spirit uniquely speaks to us, as us, through us, is us. And we do it with a sense of adventure. We do it with a sense of positive expectation. We do it because we search for the delight of the divine that is already present and awaiting our discovery. So with an open heart, an open mind, an ear tuned to the within, and an open will, I release this moment, this service, this day, to the good that it is. And I know that everywhere I look is God. And I affirm this by saying, and so it is.